India while practicing law. So probably you think that if you do an LLM, you will get into tier 1 or tier 2, or you will be able to set up your own practice more efficiently if you have that degree in your CV. So for me, I graduated from RGNUL in 2016. And then from the beginning, I was introduced to arbitration in the second year when I did Amity International Moot Court Arbitration, which was all about international commercial arbitration. So that introduced me to the subject, right? And I think we studied arbitration in fourth year, and that was taught to us by Pawar sir. So that gained a lot of attention as well. So for me, arbitration was my main interest area right from the second year, right? And I wanted to practice it when I graduated as well. So I briefly joined Cyril Amajan, wherein I had a corporate profile. I did not like that. I wanted to pursue arbitration. So then I shifted to Singh and Associates, wherein I mostly worked in construction arbitration. And I think as an Indian lawyer, if you're practicing, one most common category of cases that you'll see for arbitration is construction arbitration. So again, that happened and I enjoyed the work. And I had the opportunity to do one international maritime arbitration as well. But I think as I practiced for like 1.5 years, I had to make a decision, like work-life balance was an essential point for me. And as I was prioritizing what my career goal should be, right? Do I want to continue practicing or do I want to go in academia perhaps? So then I decided that I wanted academia. And then LLM became an essential point to start that career. So that was the point for me as to why I chose to do an LLM. And the second point here I would like to discuss is why did I decide to do an LLM in arbitration? So I think that arbitration, it's international arbitration, it's an international law subject, right? And if you get a foreign degree, so you have that international element to it, right? It's not a jurisdiction specific course. So I don't need to study French laws or UK laws specifically to know about international arbitration. It is an international course. And arbitration, as we see as a subject, it's still developing. Every year we have new topics in international arbitration to talk about, and it hasn't been talked about before. So like, I think in previous years, third-party funding, emergency arbitrations, Bitcoin arbitration, these are the new topics and nobody has ever written or spoken about it, and we're now speaking about it. So it's an ever developing subject. So I thought that there was a lot of opportunities that we as young lawyers can harvest in this area. So I think that was why I decided to do an LLM in arbitration.
Well, thank you, Ruby. Ruby actually runs a blog, a very interesting one for all of you who are interested in the advanced concepts of international arbitration. I've been a reader of that blog, and we found it thoroughly helpful insofar as the recent updates of investment arbitration is concerned. We'll put the link to that in the chat for everyone.
The blog is not that active right now, but I received a message from Gary Bond that he also visited my blog and read a few articles on it. But I got busy with my JGLS courses and then I stopped blogging it, but I'll sure get back to it again. But yeah, do share the link.
Yes, I think Jyotswarup will be sharing that. Also, I forgot to state this earlier, but if any of you have any questions that you'd like for us to address the panelists, you could probably send them in on the chat, or you could private message that to us. You get private message that to me, Mohit Dang, or to CADR_Jyotswarup, and we'll forward it along to our panelists. I think we'll come to your experiences of arbitration in the academic world in a little while. But before that, let's move to some of the other panelists that we have. Sriram, you worked at JSA for an entire year before you decided to take the leap to pursue an LLM course. What were your considerations? And do you think insofar, say, as opposed to Sai, who went for an LLM course right after his law school, what was your decision? What played an integral part in deciding for you to not pursue it right after law school?
Yeah, so for me, it was a little difficult because I initially wanted to go immediately right out of after graduating for my LLM. But at that time, I was interning at JSA in January, and my partner advised me at the time that maybe why don't you try working a bit and then taking the step to go for your masters. I mean, obviously there are always two schools of thought, and both schools are equally both schools work in this scenario, how Sai did, and how Sai, especially in Sai's case, he went immediately after his graduation. In my case, I waited for a year because obviously I wanted to work in a law firm, and I'd been interning there for quite a while. So for me, that was a consideration. And at the same time, JSA had a very good electricity team. So it was interesting to learn a new field of law at that time. But then again, similar to Ruby's situation, I also wanted to do some arbitration matters, which I couldn't do at JSA. So I decided, to especially progress in the field of arbitration, you have to understand that in India we have a lot of domestic arbitration. We do have some international arbitration matters, but then it depends in the sense that when you want to do a master's in arbitration, you should also, either you can go directly or you should go with work experience. I mean, the work experience does help in sense you have been in the field, you understand certain problems, certain situations, you've seen them before. And especially after giving my notice at JSA, I also worked with Justice Kailash Gambhir, who's also an arbitrator. He's retired, obviously. He's an arbitrator, and with him I got a chance to draft domestic arbitration awards. So that was also an interesting experience. And at that time I was thinking that yes, I should definitely pursue my master's in arbitration. And that's why I chose, after selecting various universities, I decided to go to Sciences.
I think many in the audience will have this question as to whether what are the potential benefits of going for an LLM after you've worked in the field for some while. And I think that's a very important discussion that we'll have. But before that, I think we'll like Sai's inputs on why he wanted to pursue arbitration. Sai, I remember in law school, you were always inclined towards litigation. You always wanted to be an advocate. So keeping that in mind, why did you decide to go for an LLM in arbitration? Do we have Sai with? Yes.
Coming from a legal family of I'm a third generation lawyer in my family. I always, I was always inclined towards litigation. But as I went for my internships, one thing I noticed was that the decisions do take a long time to come through. And as a lawyer, you had to wait for the results of your hard work. And with this, I did the Viz Moot in 2017. So when I went for the Viz Moot, that is the first exposure I would say that I had to proper arbitration. And I fell in love with the subject, I fell in love with the process, and I followed up the Viz Moot with a couple of internships, one with Justice S.S. Nijjar, who's a retired Supreme Court judge, and notably he's also given the Balco judgment. So I drafted a few arbitration awards, domestic, I assisted him in drafting a couple of arbitration awards. And also I interned at Cyril Amarchand, and I worked on a couple of arbitrations. And therefore, for commercial matters, especially, and construction disputes and any specialized disputes, I realized that arbitration is definitely something which is the way ahead, because the legal profession in India is slowly changing, and arbitration is a manifestation of globalization, I would say. So this allowed me to even, reach out to new places, new jurisdictions, and that's why I decided to study arbitration and pursue a career in arbitration.
So I see across the panel, what we have is a general interest in arbitration, which was initiated to you from law school itself, and that led to a culmination, right? But this is an interesting question, but this is something that we received from the last session. A lot of the viewers who have joined us today, at RGNUL, we have CADR. Across various other universities, we have a lot of ADR societies or centers which work to initiate some interest amongst the student community in ADR. However, many universities, especially I'm talking about state universities, do not have these centers, and the focus on ADR activities in such universities uh, is not paramount. For these students, would you have any recommendations as to how they can get themselves interested in arbitration, in international arbitration primarily? Perhaps we can start with you, Sai.
Yeah, absolutely. Because as far as I can remember, when we started doing the Wismood, we were at crossroads because we did not have access to proper material. We did not have adequate guidance back in 2017 with respect to international arbitration. So my advice would be to read, to follow up blogs like so far as reading, you can read Gary Bond's concise edition of arbitration, which is a really good starting point for any beginner. Like he summarizes all the issues in international arbitration in about 650 pages. So that's a very good introduction for you. And then you can follow it up with reading some of the judgments of the Supreme Court. Lately, the Indian Supreme Court has been doing very well in arbitration. And also you can follow blogs such as Ruby's blog and the Kluber arbitration blog, wherein a lot of practitioners express their opinions. So because arbitration is something that it brings academia and practice together. That's the beauty of arbitration, that practice and academia go hand in hand. So if you're sorted with the concepts, you can do very well in practice as well. So
Okay, Ruby, would you want to comment on this?
Yeah, I think as law students, if you want exposure to arbitration, so as Sai expressed, the first thing is to read. If you want international arbitration content, you have books by Gary Bond, by Julian Liu, and so on and so forth. If you want domestic arbitration, and if you want to read on any issue in domestic arbitration, I think Markanda's arbitration commentary is the best place to go to. Secondly, you can do courses like there's an organization called PACT, and I think during all the summer breaks they do like short mediation negotiation practice courses. I think ILI, Indian Law Institute, also does like winter and summer courses on arbitration programs, so perhaps you can join that. Currently, there's a very good Coursera course on international arbitration, which is being done by Leiden University. And I think it's for around 2,500 to 3,000 rupees. And I've suggested my students to do it. So if you invest that, you get a certificate from Leiden University. You get a lot of good material on international arbitration, both commercial and investment. So I think you can, there are a lot of venues like this, you know, like online programs, physical programs during your summer break, during your internship breaks, and of course the reading material. So I think that.
Okay, so I think now what we'd like to begin with is basically let's move from from the initiation of your interest into arbitration into you guys actually going ahead with the LLM program. Now, Sai and Ruby, you guys pursued your LLM program from Queen's Mary University of Law. Could you explain what the application process for your LLM was? When did you start with it? When did you determine that you're going to start with it, and how did you go about with the process? And also which universities you focus on? I see we've got this one question over here as to like which universities could be suggested for pursuing an LLM in domestic arbitration as well as international arbitration. I think we'd want to focus on universities in India, but also universities abroad. And perhaps you could have a ranking in the end of universities that you guys would recommend when students decide that they finally want to start off with an LLM program, which universities they can look at. But before that, perhaps we can have Ruby and Sai discuss why you guys chose Queen's Mary and the process for that, and then we'll have Sriram join in that conversation.
Okay. So do I go first? All right. So I chose Queen Mary because I thought that I should give the course reputation my priority over the university reputation. So Queen Mary, UCL, King's, KCL, they're all Russell Group colleges and they're all aligned at the same ranking, more or less. And Queen Mary has an arbitration course, which is the first specialized LLM course in arbitration in the entire world. And I think the professors, the courses, the professors and the course structure was the main attraction point to me as to why I chose Queen Mary. So we had people like Julian Liu, Miss Tellis, who are like, they initiated, they have, so Miss Tellis was present when, ICSID was being formed. So they're like the fathers of, international arbitration. They've seen these subjects through their inception. And to, having them as my teachers, I think was like a golden opportunity which I saw. And I applied for admission in 2017. So I wanted to start in September 2017. So I applied, I started my application process 1 year ahead. So by September 2016, I was right out of RGNUL. I was just practicing, right into the practicing. And then I started working up with my applications. And I think the first and foremost that I did was sign up for the IELTS paper, because Queen Mary requires you to get a certain grades for the IELTS paper. Then I looked up at my recommendations and my statement of purpose. And I think I submitted my application by November 2016. And the deadline was somewhere in February. So 2-3 months prior to the deadline, I submitted my application. So that's the process for you in brief. So you need 3 things on to go: your IELTS paper grade, your statement of purpose, and your letter of recommendations. And also you need to get your transcripts from the university. So this is like a general process for applying.
Insofar as the letter of recommendations were concerned, what did you focus on? Are they only academic related, or do you?
I think for UK universities, it depends on the jurisdiction and which university you're applying to. If they specifically want professional recommendations, so they will also mention it in their pamphlet or in their letter. So for example, MIDS, they specifically requires you to give you professional recommendations if you are working already. For UK universities, they generally prefer and they give more grading to your academic letter of recommendations from your teachers. So that's why I took 2 letter of recommendations from my teachers at RGNUL and 1 from my partner at law firm at that time. So yeah.
Okay. Sai, was the application process any different for you, or would you want to add anything to that?
For me, yeah. So for me, the application process was pretty much similar. However, I applied somewhere in December because I was still sorting out my references and everything else. So I applied just before the Christmas break, and I believe that it's better to apply when Ruby applied, but latest by December before the Christmas break, because the admission committee reconvenes around the 5th of January. And that's around when I got my offer. The reason I chose Queen Mary was pretty much similar to Ruby's. I had offers from NUS and a couple of other universities as well. And what was the deciding point for me was the professors. So, and professors and the plethora of subjects available on the course. So I went to the website. I went to Queen Mary's arbitration website. I checked out. So Queen Mary arbitration is called School of International Arbitration. So I looked at the professors and I looked at the course structure. And I was sold on that. I had in fact published a paper in Professor Brekulakis' journal just 3 months prior to applying to Queen Mary. And I thought that that would be a very good conversation point as well. And it did turn out to be a very interesting conversation point. So yeah.
Okay. So Sriram, what was different for you? Why Sciences Po? What is the speciality behind Sciences Po?
Yeah. So for in my case, when obviously I had to choose which university to pursue LLM from. So in my personal case, I especially wanted to work abroad. The sole reason being that I wanted to work in international arbitration matters, handle in different jurisdictions where there are a lot of different cases and a lot of different nitty-gritties. So in that case, I wanted a LLM which was very practical in its nature. So you have to understand that there are 2 types of LLMs, and obviously each LLM is interspersed with each other's qualities. But there's some LLMs which are very theoretical in nature. It's just going to be, okay, this is your bundle of information. It's going to come to you. You have to learn it, and so on and so forth. And also, there are also LLMs which, like, for example, like, especially why I chose Sciencepo was because it's a very practical LLM. So the unique feature about Sciencepo's LLM is, obviously, it's in Paris. Sciencepo is the biggest university, along with Paris Sorbonne. And so obviously, like, the reputation in Paris, in the French market, is very high. Secondly, Sciencepo's LLM is not like your usual LLM. It's actually divided into two structures. Firstly, are classes by professors, and the secondly are workshops. And what is the importance of these workshops is that they are conducted at law firms. So I have spent half of my semester, at least the previous semester and this semester, until obviously COVID intervened, at law firms, and especially at not just any law firms, the best law firms in Europe, be it Linklaters, be it Sherman and Sterling, be it Mayer Brown, be it you can take Freshfields, you could be it you name it, the creme of the law firms, Latham and Watkins. So at all these law firms, you're getting a chance to attend workshops, and these workshops are actually classes taken by law firm partners themselves. So it's very important to understand how this works, because when you're going for a master's, especially with a practical point of view, and especially with the point that, okay, I want to break into this market. So when you interact with practitioners of that market, and when you go to law firms, you sort of get a holistic understanding as to how this process works. And that is why I chose Sciencepo, because obviously Paris is one of the centers for arbitration, along with London. And I was very drawn towards QMUL also, obviously due to the standing of professors, like, as Ruby and Sai just mentioned. In fact, like, I was supposed to go with Sai initially in the first batch until I decided to postpone. But for me, Sciencepo specifically won in that aspect because it's a very practical LLM. You have a lot of opportunities to interact with, like, practitioners in the field. There are a lot of events, there are a lot of, like, lectures per se. And so that's one of the main reasons why I chose Sciencepo.
So, Sriram, how did your admission process differ from, say, of Ruby's and Sai's? Because I think they had to give IELTS. Was there any language or any other requirement that you needed to fulfill?
Yeah, actually, I also had to give IELTS or TOEFL or any one of them. So that is a requirement in Sciencepo as well. Obviously, there was a difference in the sense that, like, when you send your application, normally for, like, in most LLMs, you have to send them, like, in a letter of reference, which is drafted by obviously your referee, who's going to give it to you, and you're going to send it to the university. In Sciencepo's application, it was a little unique that actually the link would go directly to the referee, and he had to fill it by hand and answer particular questions in that regard. So in my case, I remember I gave it to my partner at JSA. He agreed to be one of my referees as my professional recommendation, because in Sciencepo they asked for both your academic as well as your professional recommendations. Be it, obviously, if you were starting out, like, as a recent graduate, you obviously wouldn't have the requirement of a professional recommendation. But in my case, they asked for both the recommendations. So obviously, I gave one from Pawar sir, obviously, and one from because he was, like, one of my arbitration lecturers, and in my law firm partner in JSA, and they individually had to fill it out by themselves. So that was one requirement. And secondly, Sciencepo's LLM, like, as, like, in terms of selection, how to get into these programs, because Sciencepo only takes 20 students per year. It does not take more than 20 students. So out of 20, out of a lot of applications, you have to understand, like, where exactly, like, what exactly you have to mention in your statement of purposes and all, because you have to show them that you have a very practical aspect, especially for Sciencepo, because you have to show that I want to work in this field. I want to understand, like, various types of arbitrations. And, like, either, or if you are a practitioner coming from an investment law background or something, you can say that, okay, I have an investment law background. Now I want to understand commercial arbitration, for example. And obviously, you have to draw your attention to the caliber of professors. Obviously, like, in QMUL, you have, like, Stravos and Lucas Mistelis, Julian Liu, who are teaching you. In here we have Diego Fernandez, who's like a renowned arbitration practitioner. You have Emmanuel Gayad, who's obviously the father of international arbitration. And obviously there are a lot of fathers, but like Gayad is also considered one of them. And you have a lot of famous lecturers and a lot of law firm partners. So you have to tailor-made your statement of purpose, particularly in that regard.
Okay, I think we're getting a lot of questions in
Right.
here. Just a caveat: we will not be dealing with all the questions right now. We'll try and deal with some of them, but we'll have in the end an open session wherein you can again post these questions. So if by some perchance your questions get missed out, do not worry. We will resolve all the questions, right? But I think coming back, I think there must be like two questions which are at the helm of all of our viewers today. One is, of course, with respect to deciding of universities. From whatever the conversation up until now has been, I can understand that the major components for you guys deciding where you wanted to pursue your LLM from was, of course, one, the professors, and two, the hub at which the university was located, right? Was there any other university or universities which you applied to, which for which there was a different consideration? Is there anything of that sort?
Yeah, actually, so in my case, I'd applied to NUS. I'd gotten NUS, and MIDS I was on the waiting list, and ultimately I couldn't get through to MIDS. But I got into Stockholm, I got into NUS and then I got into QMU. I obviously got into QMUL the year before, so I deferred that just in case. So it was among these particular set of universities, because apart from these universities, Sciences and possibly the Leiden also is also coming up with a program recently. So apart from these set of universities, I don't think so it's worth pursuing like an LLM in arbitration anywhere else, because these are actually where main practitioners teach you, where main practitioners inculcate you in the various processes and steps of arbitration. So for me, in my view, that there are other universities, but these set of universities are where all the main practitioners. There's also a couple of calls for university in Miami, which has its own international arbitration program, and that's actually very good. But you have to understand which market you're looking for. So if you're looking from a very domestic perspective, you're going to come back to India ultimately, and so you're just going to look at it from the fact of, okay, I just want to understand various processes of arbitrations. So obviously MIDS is considered to be the best, but obviously even MIDS has its own drawbacks at the end of the day, because if especially for let's take the scenario for people who want to pursue domestic arbitration, want to do a master's. So in that case, MIDS is the best case scenario, the most difficult to get in, because it is an institution of name, and the best program for international arbitration. And so when you come back, obviously it's just going to be information and return. And for example, if you take Miami's program, it also has a lot of reputed professors such as Jan Paulsen, for example, who's also a big shot in this industry. But again, if you're pursuing an arbitration in Miami, you have to look at the market also over there. And over there, it's really favored towards Latin Americans. So, I mean, yeah, so these are the set of universities, if Ruby and Sai want to add anything.
Sai, Ruby, are there any other considerations that perhaps our viewers need to be concerned about? And not only that, but insofar as looking at these considerations are concerned and figuring out which university fits what parameter, what other resources can the viewers use? I know there are a few websites which they can use to determine, to get to know which program fits where insofar as all these universities are concerned. So perhaps you guys could gleam at that as well.
I think if I speak about myself, I applied to MIDS. I was waitlisted. I got into Stockholm, but I did not go for it because I thought most of the courses at Stockholm are taught by one professor. Not saying that the university or the course does not have a reputation, but I decided to go for QMUL instead. I think one of the main factors that students can look up while spotting the university or figuring out which university to apply for, you can look at the work visa requirements of that country. For example, I know a couple of people who went to do arbitration specialized LLM in Hamburg University. And Germany at this time provides, I think, like a 3-year work visa after you get your degree. So that's a very good and an optimum place to be if you want to, remain in that country and look up for work opportunities, because it just gets easier if you get your visa in the hand. UK, lately they have relaxed their rules, and now they give you a 2-year work window. So I think these are also the factors. Work visa is, I think, should be the factor if you are looking to work abroad. I think Singapore offers like a 1-year work window. US does not offer anything as far as I know. But I think, yes, so your goals should be clear in your mind as to what you want to get out of that LLM. If you want to come back to India, so just go for the best university with the best reputation, or the in university terms wise or the course wise, and just get the degree and come back and do your practice or academics or whatever you want to do. If you want to settle abroad, then maybe you need to look at it at a wider angle. Possibly you compromise with the university and the course reputation, but you go to a place where you have, that you'll get the opportunities for sure. So I think you need to prioritize your goals before looking up at the universities. And I think LLM guide was the biggest tool for me when I was applying. So other than that, like, just go up to LinkedIn, like search for universities over Google, go on to LinkedIn and contact as many people as you want. I think people reply if you send them a text message, and you can ask them anything, like their experience from the course. You can get advice from them. So yeah, so network and Google search, I think, are the best tools.
Sai, also, I remember speaking to you a few months ago, and we discussed how the post-Brexit situation will affect employment scope for foreign students if they're pursuing an LLM. Would you like to gleam on that? Has there been a policy shift? Is it beneficial, or was the previous status quo better?
In terms of employability for Indians, it's definitely better. Only in terms of employability, because there would be more Europeans and Indians would be at the same platform at this point of time. However, that is given that you have the same qualification, and you suit the requirements of the company. The biggest barrier, I believe, for Indians is the lack of a third language. Like, each of us know our mother tongue and English, but a third language, which is insofar as a European language like Spanish, French, all the law firms require that. And also, if I may add, if you want to practice solely in arbitration, it's very, very, very difficult to break into that field alone. Maybe you can shift into arbitration later in your career, because in UK, what you need to do is the preferred mode of employment is training contract. So when you go for a training contract, it's 2 years of GDL, 2 years of LPC, and then 4 seats in different fields in a law firm, one of which would be a dispute seat. But at the end of it, the law firm can put you as per its own whims. Therefore, and arbitration, believe me, is the most toughest market to break into, especially in London, Paris, and New York. Therefore, and I know people who've done their LLMs, who've done masters, who've worked a lot, and they despite having English qualification, they've had to wait for 1.5 to 2 years before getting into London. So yes, there'll be an increase in employability of Indians after Brexit, but not in arbitration. If you want to enter into arbitration, you need to satisfy all those secondary factors, that is a secondary language, and also perhaps foreign qualification, insofar as you're foreign qualified, because as per my understanding and my conversations with a lot of law firms, they usually require you to come through the training contract route. However, if you're foreign qualified already, insofar as you've qualified in India and you've given the QLTS exam, which is a slightly expensive proposition, and then you build it. You start networking in the UK, you start talking to people and they actually like you, then they can create some paths for you so that you can get employment in their firms. So that is also a probable route, that if you have a foreign qualification, like you're eligible to practice in that particular jurisdiction. I'm talking specifically about London. And if I may add also to what Sriram and Ruby referred, I think while selecting a university, you cannot select solely as MITS, Queen Mary. What you need to do is look at 3 or 4 factors. And having the benefit of both Ruby's and Sriram's experience, I can perhaps categorize it insofar as, first, you need to look at how does a particular course coincide with your career goals. So that is, if you want to work abroad, if you want to come back to India, what kind of exposure you're getting there. Second, you need to look at the course content and the professors, insofar as what kind of experience are you going to get from your LLM course. And also you need to look at your cohort. That is the students that you're going to be studying with. In places like Queen Mary, you have about 60 to 70 odd students, and it offers a wider batch, and also people from a lot of different jurisdictions. However, the cohort is not selective. Whereas in Sciences Po, the cohort is very selective insofar as it's limited to 20 people. So you need to vary these considerations. The good thing about Queen Mary for me was that in my class, we had people from 55 different jurisdictions in one class. Right. But at the same time, again, it wasn't as selective as it would have been for Sriram. So therefore, you need to sit down, look at all these factors, talk to people, look at LLM Guide and all these websites, and then take a call.
Well, I think that really makes it lucid for some of the questions that we'd received as to how do you go about with university selection. Now, Sriram, I see this is a question that has popped up once or twice, and this is something that Sai hinted at, which is basically the issue of language helping you in these courses. Now, I know you speak French. I think you probably spoke French before you went to Paris. One, was that a requirement for you, or did it in any way assist you in your selection at Sciences Po? And secondly, I know that you've attended French classes over there. That's something that possibly the university mandates. What is the benefit of being initiated to French in Paris and practicing over there? Does that help insofar as getting any work over there is concerned, or is that something that you can do away with?
Okay, it's a very good question, and especially prevalent in light of what I'm going to say, because I didn't speak, like, obviously my French was very rudimentary, obviously, like, before coming to Paris I had to work on it, and in hindsight I probably should have worked even more, because now I can speak French, I can speak decent French, but when it comes to languages, in France, I'm just speaking from a France perspective. Obviously, the French language is very important, because the French, especially, they prefer to speak in their own language. But you have to understand, like, in light of your question, when you said that, when can this be done away with? Well, it could, because you have to understand, like, when you're working in international arbitration, the main language is English. But a language requirement is very important, and especially, like, now I'm even considering learning Spanish also, because, like, French and Spanish are 2 languages which are crucial in international arbitration. Now the question is why? Because in the market, you obviously are going to get to work on a lot of cases when you're seeking to break in. So why should an employer hire you? So, or rather hire you, or why should even consider you for an internship position, and so on and so forth. So that is where languages come into play, because especially, like, if you know Spanish, you can immediately start working on Latin American arbitration matters. Because if you didn't know Spanish, then obviously, okay, the documents might come in English, because let's say it's an ICC arbitration and the languages are mandatorily required to be in English and French. But your clients are going to be in Spanish. If it's Latin American, they're going to be majorly Spanish or Portuguese speakers. So in that sense, if you want to break into the market, having that added language is very necessary. And secondly, especially in France, you have to learn French. It's a must. I mean, if you don't learn French, you can break into a law firm, but it's going to be a little more difficult.
Right. Okay. So I think the conclusion of that, seeing as how Sai and Sriram have both stressed on this, perhaps our viewers should start working on learning foreign languages before they even go out to pursue their LLM courses, whether they pursue it in the UK or anywhere else for that matter of fact. Okay, so I think now what we'll segue into is the work that you did while you were pursuing your LLM courses. We've been receiving a lot of questions with respect to those. So I know that Sai and Ruby, you'll be speaking about open days that we have over there in UK. Sriram, I've seen your posts. You've been working in France as well. So what are the projects that you worked on while you were pursuing your LLM courses, and also other work related activities, whether with firms or possibly with barristers or what have you? So perhaps Sriram, you'd like to start off with the culture in France.
Right. With respect to work, obviously, the program takes up most of your time. And what I've been using this spare time instead, obviously an LLM program is very intensive. You have to understand that. And you have to do justice to it ultimately, because it's not like the Indian system, because over here, even in the UK also, what we follow is something known as the Socratic Method. You're given a list of readings before the class. You have to do those readings, and you ultimately, then in class, it's more of a discussion where you present your thoughts on those readings, on the issues, and so on and so forth. So yeah, anyway, this is just a little sidetrack, but returning to the main point, what I've been doing is obviously in law firms, when you're getting to go for workshops, they actually give you a couple of matters which are obviously they've obviously worked on those matters already. But the interesting bit is, because since you're getting to look at them as a first time, if you've never worked in international arbitration, this is a huge gold mine. Because obviously in theory we can study what arbitration is and what arbitration laws are and what the various types of arbitration are, but when you actually see matters and when you actually see case files, this is a huge bonus, because then you understand actually how the system works. So that's obviously at law firms we're getting to do that. In fact, one of our workshops at Sherman and Sterling, we had to do a cross-examination of a technical expert. And this guy was an actual expert at Deloitte. So who had actually been in arbitrations, and he was a world-renowned expert on semiconductors. So we actually had to, at least I spent at least more than a month researching on that, because when you're cross-examining a technical expert, you have to be on point. So it's very interesting, because these are some things which France I really loved. And obviously I was really interested in the Wismut as a student. And then over here, with this added profile, you could get to go to judge Wiz competitions. So I went to Hague, where the Peace Palaces, and I got to do the Hague previous, where I judged a couple of rounds, as well as in Barcelona, where I went for the previous as well to judge. So you're going as a judge. It's very interesting, because now you're on the other side of the table. And I was supposed to go for the final rounds this time, but obviously COVID cancelled it. And due to my final exams and publications coming up, I decided to skip the final rounds of this time, to judge the WIS finals in the WIS Vienna online finals. But yeah, so this is what I've been up to. And you should always do something on the side in the LLM, trying to work on your profile and trying to see what you can do.
Okay. Sai and Ruby, would you want to come in over here? Ruby, how was your experience over there in London? Can we have anecdotes? What was your favorite moment professionally while you were pursuing your LLM course?
So since I have an academic point of view while I was doing my LLM, so I focused more on the symposiums and the seminars that we had. So there's this joint conference with Queen Mary and Vienna University, which they do every year. And they ask students to present on various topics. So I presented on one. And we had students from both the university, professors from both the universities. And it was a very informative and a brilliant session to go through. Other than that, I've been to many symposiums by, different universities, Oxford University, Cambridge University, talking about the most upcoming international arbitration topics. And to just participate in that, you get to do networking and you get to ask as many questions as you have. Other than that, I've been to, so in London, and I think in Europe as well. So each law firm has their open days, and some law firms even have an application-based system when they invite students to those open days. So what happens is, in those open days, each partner will give you a review about how their team works, how the firm works, and what their field of specialization is, what kind of matters they do. And they have little activities for the students, in terms of they'll give you a small legal project or a research thing or just a group activity for you to do. And then afterwards you can just network with the partners, because, and that's most essential if you have attended an open day of a law firm. So in London we have something called summer schemes and your winter schemes. So these are the 2-week internship programs that they offer. And while applying for these programs, these application systems are very intensive. So these are like a 10-page application for a 2-week internship program with the law firm. And if you get that internship, and if you're able in making a mark for yourself, so that gets you very close to a training contract. So I've been to these open days. They were also like very informative, a fresh experience, for an Indian student to have, because they have a completely different program and a method of providing internships and how they offer jobs. So that's completely different from the Indian market. So I think that was the highlight of my LLM in terms of the professional aspect, that the entire system is different. And just to be, introduced to that system, that was quite good.
I think we'd also like to have a discussion on the cultural differences insofar as firms are concerned, insofar as even litigation is concerned. And perhaps I could shed more light on that as well, as to the difference of the work culture that exists when, say, you're in a law school in India and when you're pursuing your LLM abroad over there. Sai?
So are you talking in terms of work, students' life, or are you speaking in terms of the work in law firms and litigation?
Student life. As a student, say the internship experiences that we have in India, how that would differ from the experiences that you have over there in the UK. And perhaps Ruby and Sriram could join us in that as well.
So in UK, especially because I've lived there, everything is very compartmentalized. So if you want to go into litigation, you have to go through the barrister route. So you need to approach specific chambers for mini pupilages, or if you want to go into corporate sector, or if you want to go into law firms, then you need to approach those law firms. So everything is very linear and very compartmentalized. Therefore, you need to choose your options very wisely, and you need to sell yourself on why you're opting for that thing particularly. So that is one major difference in work culture. I was talking to an Indian barrister who works for 21 Essex. 21 Essex Chambers is one of the biggest chambers in the world. And he told me that back in the day, about 25 years ago, even in UK, it mattered that you're which QC, that is equivalent of a senior advocate, you're which senior advocate's son or godson. But now everything is in the hands of recruiters. The partners have very little say. Yes, the senior advocates or QCs, they can put in a word, but that will merely get you an interview.
Right.
Beyond that, you'll have to do everything on your own. You'll have to sell yourself to the recruiters, and most of the recruiters, they aren't even lawyers. They have knowledge about law, but they are looking, they will look at you on the basis of your networking skills, how well can you speak, and how can you analyze situations, right? Although, because what happens is you send in an application to a recruiter, and as Ruby mentioned, the applications are extremely long, and then they refer it to the law firm partners. They'll shortlist a few applications and then refer it to the partners, and the partners conduct at least 3 rounds of interviews and various other assessments, and on basis of this you receive offers for a 2 weeks internship. So but in terms of work culture, one thing is that it's very open. They'll be very direct. At the same time, in the winter and summer vacation schemes, you'll only get an insight into how a law firm works. You will not get anything beyond basic research. Whereas in India, it depends. Like sometimes they even involve you in cases. They give you some drafting bits as well. But in the UK, this is not happening. They will involve you in research, and that's it, because you're there in the firm only for 2 weeks. And in fact, what they do is they are advertising their firm to you, that you come and opt for the firm. So they'll take you for all these fancy lunches, brunches, and dinners. But you're not going to get too much insight into the professional life. However, the working culture is very different. People, designation does not matter as much as your work does. And which is something I really appreciated about the UK. Like we had judges, we had Court of Appeal judges just walking into our universities and, just standing and talking to us very normally. They didn't expect a red carpet to be rolled for them. And that is a very different, and they wanted to be addressed by the first names. So
I think that's a very positive attribute. Sriram, yeah, you worked extensively in France as an LLM pursuant. You worked over here in India in a law firm. How would you juxtapose your experiences in India with your experience in France?
I'll just start on the note, just continuing from Sai's point regarding the, internships. As Sai's pointing out, it's 2 weeks over there. Over here, it's the minimum requirement for an internship is at least 6 months. So they don't have short internships. They do, some law firms and boutique arbitration firms do have 3-month internships. But then again, coming as an Indian student, I can tell you boutique arbitration firms will deal with mainly French domestic arbitration matters. So your French has to be exceedingly good and your legal French has to be exceedingly good. So that's not a market you're particularly looking at. But coming in terms of, but all these international arbitration firms over here offer 6 months. And it's mandatory to do an internship. You cannot get directly hired out of law school. You have to do an internship. It's mandatory. And at least what I find much better in this environment is that, for example, if I can draw a parallel between my experiences. In JSA, I had interned once. I was lucky enough to receive a call back. And then ultimately, I had an interview after which I was hired. But normally in India, what I see the culture is that you have these 1-month internships, and ultimately, yes, as Sai pointed out, in some cases, they do give you the, to work on cases and work on some matters and so on and so forth. But otherwise, it's just plain research, and ultimately, it's very difficult to catch a partner's eye or catch a law firm's eye as to why they should hire you. But over here in France, what I see is that because you have 6 months, and because the number of interns is it depends. Now, a super big firm like White & Case over here, White & Case Paris, as I know, has 10 interns right now from this January to June slot, which is going right now. Not actually 10, it has 20, sorry. It has 20 interns. So in that cases, yes, the work you might be getting would be a little less because there are 20 interns. But there are a lot of big law firms which only have 3 or 4 interns. So why is that advantageous? Because these law firms have a lot of cases and they will actively rely on you as a professional. So the advantage is that you're not just sitting and doing basic research over there. You're not just making case notes or compilations there. You're actively working on matters. You're actively drafting matters. And you, for all means and purposes, you are an employee over there because you're getting paid and you're getting paid very well. So right. Yeah, as compared in India, for example, if I would say, let's say in India, I don't know, in JSA, it was 2,500 rupees per week. So, which was ultimately coming out to what, around 9,000 per month. It was that was the pay rate at my time. But over here in internships, you get paid very well. So so at least if I take an example, Clifford Chance pays you 2,600 euros. After tax, it becomes 2,200 euros. And that's a lot of money because you can actually continue to stay on in France and use internships as a method to secure a job or something. And in terms of the culture, yeah, again, as I pointed out, this sir concept is completely abolished. No, you address by first names over here. So
I think when we talk of the stipend that you get, that will also bring us to this another question that was raised previously. which is
Right.
how do you manage your living expenses when you're over there, especially as a student? I think we'll start with Ruby. It's been a long time since you've been a student in London, so perhaps like you could gleam over how that has been in retrospect.
All right. So London is a very expensive city, and I tried doing some odd jobs there, and getting some pocket money or just to like spend without having my mind on it as to how many pounds I'm shelling out of my wallet. But yeah, it's an expensive city. But I think as a student, either you can do odd jobs or you can do internships, or there are methods of earning and living well. Like there are methods of living cheap, so to speak, and still be able to manage your funds. And if I can also speak about scholarships here, so there are a lot of scholarships which universities offer. But currently, as I see the market pattern, since India is not, it's coming out of the developing countries segment, so they don't generally prefer Indian students for scholarships because your background matters. So most of the scholarship students that were around me were from the least developed countries or countries below India in the economic sense. So that's one way about scholarship. The other way to get a scholarship is to just approach senior advocates, big companies here. I know a couple of RGNUL alumni who were able to secure funding from the Tata Group. They also offer several scholarships for the students going abroad. So I think the key is to just keep searching as to which company, which local scholarships you have available to yourself, and they also have application based system. So these big companies, they offer like annual scholarships if you're going abroad to study, but there's an application system for them. They have deadlines, so you need to get a check on those applications and fill it regularly. So I think that's one way to go about and managing your funding.
Sai, would you want to compound to that? How did you manage your stay in London, especially if in context of if there could be any scholarships that could be availed of say once you're over there?
Insofar as scholarships to be availed once you're in London, to my knowledge, to the best of my knowledge, there weren't any. But as a student, you can do a few odd jobs, and or I think most of the students who go there, they do odd jobs. I myself worked in a restaurant 2 times a week, and that managed. I could manage my living expenses in London, and yeah. So with respect to scholarships, you need to apply to the scholarships before before you go for the programs, and sometimes before even you get offers from these universities. If I can point out a few scholarships, one is the Commonwealth Scholarship, which is very, very hard but worth the try. Then there is the Tata Endowment, as Ruby mentioned. There is INLAC Scholarship, and for working professionals, with especially for people who have 2 years of work experience, there is the Shievening Scholarship. However, I'll give you a broad rider that it's very difficult for people in arbitration or in commercial law to get these scholarships, because usually the scholarships go to either underprivileged people, people from very remote areas who do not have easy access to education, or to people who are in the human rights field. Right. It's very difficult to get these scholarships, but it's worth the try. It's definitely worth the try.
I think we've also been receiving certain questions from Mr. Vatsal Parikh, who's actually going to be pursuing the LLM. And I think, Sai, this is particularly for you. As so insofar as the language is concerned, we're sort of drifting back a little. Insofar as language is concerned, Vatsal has a question as to whether they should learn both Spanish and French or any other foreign language when you're pursuing your degree over there.
Are you speaking of learning languages while pursuing a degree in London?
While or preferably before you go over there?
I think preferably would be before you go for the degree, because once you go for an LLM, you'll have a lot of readings to do. I personally had about 300 pages of reading per class that I had to go to, and that was compartmentalized into essential and supplemental reading, and we ended up doing both. And then obviously you'll have a lot of events. You'll have to participate in a lot of conferences. They'll be taking you to a lot of conferences, and also you'll have to interact with your cohorts. So you'll be going for a lot of dinners. You'll be going for a lot of parties as well. So you'll have to manage your time very effectively. Therefore, learning a new language at that point of time can be very hard, and it can be very challenging. Therefore, I would recommend that you learn a language beforehand, and try to pick up any language like French, Spanish. If you're very keen and you're very good at it, even Chinese. There's a lot of transactions happening in Chinese. German is a very good language. So any of the European languages, and especially look at countries which have a lot of arbitrations. So Spain has a lot of arbitrations, and therefore the law firms need people who can speak Spanish. That is the reason why they require second languages, because a lot of transactions, especially in investment arbitration, happen in the particular European language.
I think what we'll now move forward is to some of these very quick questions from me, and then hopefully in a few minutes we'll open the floor up, because I see we have a plethora of questions which we would want to address. So very quickly, I know that Sai and Sriram, we've spoken previously, and you've told me about the brilliant experiences you've had with your professors, brilliant individuals, people the who's who of international arbitration, right? So very quickly, Ruby, starting with you, what was your best anecdote that you can share with us while you were pursuing your LLM program?
So I think my professor, my dissertation supervisor was Maxie Sherrill, and she's a big hotshot for investment arbitrations. So all my meetings with her, like we would sit for an hour at a stretch when meetings were just for 15 minutes. And you get 4 meetings with your supervisors for your dissertation, but I had, I think, possibly more than that. So all my interactions with her, I think, were like highlight for me. And, you know, all the information that I could get out of her about investment arbitration and her experience in arbitration in general. And she now happily, so I'm looking at my PhD applications now, and she's one of my referees as well. So I think the rapport that I've made with her is highlight for me.
What about you, Sriram? What's been the highlight for your LLM course up until now?
Well, obviously, like, you know, I've met a lot of hotshots, and like, you know, some people whose readings I've read, like, you know, when I started learning about arbitration. Gary Bourne obviously was one of our lecturers, and like, you know, I got a chance to interact with him personally, and like, you know, talk to him and ask some questions I had regarding arbitration. And obviously Professor Emmanuel Gaillard, who's a big shot in his own name. And with regards to a very personal example, actually one of our lecturers was Chester Brown. Now, Chester Brown is the head of the University of Sydney, and he's a visiting lecturer at Sciences Po. So he obviously alternates his time between Australia and France. But he's a world-renowned practitioner, and he's like one of the best up and coming. What I would say, he's one of the best counsels out there in terms of, like, you know, interstate disputes and investment arbitrations in general. And with him, like, you know, in his lectures especially, I connected with him, and then, like, you know, he took us out to dinner, and then, like, you know, we were talking about a general, because he is very curious in the Indian market, because, like, you know, he's done a couple of investment arbitrations for a law firm over there, especially, like, you know, in terms of with regarding to particular BITs. And it was very interesting, because, you know, you read about these people as though they're demigods and, like, you know, they're on a higher pedestal, but they're actually very interactive and very forthcoming in terms of, like, you know, are very approachable, I would say. And like any questions I had, and like, you know, Chester agreed to be my reference to the ICC. So it's pretty great, and like, when you get to interact with such people, because these guys are the best. So I mean, yeah.
I think if it may be permissible, I would recommend all our viewers who joined us today to follow Sriram on Instagram. There's a lot of stories with a lot of who's who of international arbitration, and Sriram chilling with them. Sai, what's been your best experience at QMUL London?
So going with the flow, as Ruby and Sriram, both of them mentioned their experiences with particular professors. Even my interesting anecdote is with one particular professor, Professor Brekulakis. So during our first session, introductory session, I walked up to him, I introduced myself, and I told him that I had published an article in a journal in which he was the editor, and he was like, which version was that? I said 2018. He's like, what's your name again? Sai Anukaran. You wrote on, and he told me my topic. He told me about what I'd written on the paper. So that was his retentive capacity. And moving forth, all of us, we had very interactive classes. So in the end, he was my dissertation supervisor, and he called 14 of us for the first meeting, and he gathered all of us in the same room. And before that, prior to that, he had asked all of us to give a title and a short explanation on a dissertation. That particular day, he's like, just all of you have 1 minute each. Just quickly summarize your topic and your give me your title and your brief summary of what you're going to deal with in your dissertation. All of us spoke, and then he picked on each one of us one by one, and he criticized both our headings and the material that we had given him, and also he interspersed with how we had explained it to him. He remembered everything about all 14 of us, and by the end of the meeting, all of us were shaking because the amount of work that he had asked us to do was enormous. But at the same time, when you have such people who are pushing you into such directions, that does lead to wonderful results. So at the end of the dissertation, when I submitted my dissertation, he was very, the professor, he gave personal comments to each of us. He's very appreciative of our dissertations. And also he agreed to be a reference. And that's how I got my current job. In fact, he was the reference for my current job.
So I think what we'll do now is we'll just have one last question. I know Sai, Ruby, Sriram, you want to deal with two issues, which is one, managing the expectations, right? I think that is a caveat that we'd want to address. And two, the impact of COVID-19. This was even a question that was asked earlier. And thereafter, we could open
I missed the first issue because of
managing the expectations for students who go to pursue an LLM.
Right. Okay.
So if you guys would want to take up with that, any of you.
Okay, I can start for like in my personal experience of how things work here in France. So if you're going from an academic perspective, that's obviously like an LLM can never disappoint in that regard, especially because obviously you're just there to learn, and you're there to meet a lot of people, meet a lot of contacts, meet a lot of who's and what's in the field. But when you're especially going from a very practical standpoint and trying to break into the market, so sometimes LLM programs oversell themselves, and LLM programs have a tendency. So that's very important when you're selecting an LLM for arbitration, especially from a practical standpoint, because sometimes LLMs, and actually especially in France over here, like LLMs are the only way an international individual can break into the market. Unless obviously he's a renowned practitioner in his or her home jurisdiction and obviously received an invite to come and work in France. But otherwise, as a student, especially if you want to break into the market here, an LLM is considered to be very vital because it gives you that French degree, which is required to work in the market. So obviously LLM programs have a tendency to oversell themselves always. Obviously there are a lot of advantages, but you have to be very careful that just don't rely on everything what the LLM program says. For example, let's say in my case, we had, so normally the concept of open days is not that prevalent in France, but we had like a job fair. So what Sciences Po is going to show you on its website is there is a job fair where law firms will come. However, for example, when we went for that particular job fair, half of the law firms are French and were only interested in like francophones, like as in like French speakers or people from former French jurisdictions. And and they were it was a frankly useless exercise in terms of if you wanted to make your presence felt and talk to particular law firms as to how to apply for an internship and how to get a job over there. So sometimes, yes, each program has its own slight drawbacks in that way, in the sense that when you go with certain expectations. So how I would suggest, like, managing the expectations of the LLM is that you go with a very fresh outlook, that you imagine yourself in the worst case scenario, and then, like, if an added benefit comes, you just take it. So how I would suggest to any person who's, like, applying for an LLM, especially with, in terms of like looking a job in this market, like in France or in England or anything, is to immediately start building up a contact base and immediately start researching without waiting for opportunities to come from the LLM. So that way you have done everything you could do from your side. And then, so that's what I understand by this concept of managing the expectations of the LLM.
Okay. Ruby, you've worked in the field after you've come back. What's been your understanding? How has the LLM helped you? Would you recommend to put in certain segments that perhaps an LLM might not be the most useful thing that they can pursue in the academic world as well as in respect of other professions?
So I think for the academic world, LLM is an essential, because that's your, until and unless you don't have an LLM, you can't be a professor, basically. So you do need an LLM to enter into academic world. Other than that, by managing your expectations, once you are an LLM student, be on the top of your readings and start your, career finding as soon as you get admitted to an LLM. So if you want to settle abroad, then probably, and if you've worked for a few years, so I would probably advise that you look into the bar exam of that jurisdiction and you go on ahead with it. I've seen many job applications in Singapore, Hong Kong, and in UAE, which require you to be an England qualified solicitor. So if you take QLTS, you're already England qualified, and the market for job, that just widens up for you. So looking at the bar exam is one aspect. The second aspect would be to consider your visa opportunities. So after my LLM, I got one internship in London and Paris, but both of them asked me that you have to get your own work visa. But that's not possible through a fair route, right? So that was a limitation for me. So if you don't want this limitation for you, then think about it at the prior hand. When LLM cannot be that useful if you want to practice in India and remain in India, and if you don't want your knowledge to expand on that level, because if you're in India and if you're only dealing with the domestic cases, and as we know, domestic arbitration is basically just, a legal case, just the physical venue is different. You're doing the same things. You're referring to CPC, you're referring to Evidence Act. You're doing all those things which you do in a courtroom. You're just in a fancier hotel rather than a courtroom. So probably then LLM is not the tool for you, or you can skip that step and, just go on ahead with your career. But as we all three spoke, that it's a very personal choice for you. Do you want a knowledge base to expand? Do you want that additional accessory on your CV? It may or may not help you. That's up to the opportunities that you get. So after an LLM, each and every one of us has our own journey, but I think it's useful, like for most of us, we're doing well after our LLMs. So, but it's a personal choice at the end of the day.
Sai, if you want to come in on this. Hello.
Yeah. I completely concur with Ruby and Sriram. LLM is a very personal decision, but I'll first talk about the benefits. The benefits are that it not only shapes your personality, it not only shapes your professional and academic skills, but it also shapes your personality, because you get to talk with people from different jurisdictions, different cultures, different religions, and that kind of opens up your mind. So that is a very worthwhile experience, I would say. And yes, as Ruby mentioned, that in case of domestic arbitrations, it is not completely necessary for you to pursue an LLM, because you'll be spending a lot of money while going for the LLMs, both for living expenses and your tuition fees. So therefore, that is an obvious barrier. And if money is a problem, it is not essential for you to just go for an LLM and then develop, because there are a lot of other ways to learn, by participating in competitions, by reading. That is what an LLM does, is basically that you are doing reading in an environment wherein you can probably nurture yourself better. So at the end of the day, I would say that an LLM provides you with a platform to explore further opportunities, but everything is on you. Even when it comes to reading in classes, when it comes to interacting with the professors, it's completely a personal choice. Nobody is going to spoon feed you anything. Nobody is going to, knock sense into you. It's completely up to you and how you want to take up that opportunity. And I've seen people completely ruin that opportunity. Being very frank, I've seen people who did not read up for their classes, who did not attend their classes seriously, and at the same time I saw people who worked very hard, who went the extra mile during the classes, and that obviously it translates into their work, and that helped them further in their careers.
Okay, so very quickly now, how do you think that the COVID-19 situation will impact LLMs, will impact, what are your thoughts on this entire pandemic? What is in the future for our viewers?
I think COVID is definitely going to impact the LLM programs. Firstly, I would encourage each of you to write to the universities to talk about the probable disruptions, because at this point of time, all of us can merely, we can merely predict, we can try and analyze what the impact might be. Yes, there will be a definite impact on the cohort, because many people having this kind of barrier that COVID might affect their classes, might affect their course, may take up LLMs in the subsequent years. So that it might be so that you'll have lesser number of people in the course, and that makes it more selective. Like you might it might be beneficial, because you can be very, you can get closer to your professors, you can form deeper relationships as compared to when you have a very large cohort. But for better impact, I would encourage that each of you write to your universities, you ask them about the probable disruptions, because some countries might even impose foreign travel restrictions for a certain period, as per my understanding. And therefore, it's completely advisable to approach them and only then take up on your offers.
Okay. Ruby and Sriram, if you would want to add anything to that, or we could move to the questions as well.
I think COVID would also affect the job market later on, because as the many speculations that the world might be entering into recession. So I have absolutely no idea how the job market for the legal arbitration world is going to be. The countries might be open to, Indian people applying and settling there, or they might be forming restrictions for us. So everything is quite uncertain, both as to how the courses will go about and what the job market would be for the next 2 years at least.
I think the international nature of arbitrations would certainly be affected by this. No, Sriram, would you have anything to add to this? I think you've been
sorry. Actually, I feel that yes, definitely there is definitely going to be an impact on LLMs and in arbitration in general, obviously, because ultimately we don't know how long this is going to last at the end of the day. There's no set timer for this. That you can say that, oh, this is going to end in June, or this is going to end in July, and we can start planning from then onwards. There's no end date for this right now. And also another factor is that each country has its own end date for COVID. So if, for example, like China's, again, you don't know the news, but like in China, cases are coming down / have gone down, and they have obviously gone through their peak and right now are going down. Here in France, right now, we are approaching the peak. In India, I understand that the peak, you have not even reached the peak yet. So it varies, and what is the impact of that is because arbitrations are getting affected in general, because if you follow arbitrations and all, you can see, for example, each institution like the ICC, the PCA, all are releasing guidelines as to how arbitrations are going to be proceeding in this pandemic period. And you have to understand that only important urgent arbitrations are being entertained by ICC, as well as when you're coming to enforcement and challenging of awards in the domestic level, even in those cases, because as I understand as I understand in India, in the Supreme Court is only entertaining urgent matters. Is that right, Sai?
Yes.
Yeah. So exactly. So urgent matters, the question is whether arbitration would come into them. So yeah, obviously the market is affected, your programs are affected, obviously, because like, ultimately without that physical element, the LLM sort of becomes an online course in itself, like any online course you would pursue. But hopefully we should see an improvement. But yeah.
Right. Okay. So I think now we'll finally open the floor up for questions, unless the panelists want any other specific issue to deal with. I think we can open up to questions. So we have a few questions over here ready. Anyone else? I see we still have a lot of participants with us. If you want to put, if you have any questions which you've asked earlier, but we might have missed out on, this is your opportunity. Send in your questions. But there's this one particular one which I think is very relevant. This is from Archana Gupta. She says, are there enough jobs right now in the arbitration circle? You hear a lot of talk about the arbitration community getting stagnated. What's been your perception for people who are yet to like enter the international arbitration community? What can they expect? Can they expect a lot of jobs?
From what I've experienced in London, London is pretty much saturated when it comes to the arbitration market. And even the law firms, they make it a point to mention this, that if you want to enter into the disputes practice, it's very saturated and the competition is very high. However, across the world, and arbitration being such a international mechanism, the arbitration jobs are not saturated. There are a lot of jobs available in a lot of jurisdictions, including Germany, Netherlands, France. France is very competitive, but yes, there are jobs available. And then even India, like of late, there are a lot of avenues in India. So I think as Indians, we can even look at India, because India is trying to improve its reputation internationally. And hopefully we'll have a lot of foreign arbitrations soon. Although most foreign arbitrations are going to Singapore right now. However, even the Indian arbitration scope is expanding a lot. And therefore, Indian market is also something that we need to look at. And at the same time, however, jobs are not maxed out. It's just that if you want to go to only very select few jurisdictions, then it can be very difficult to break in. But at the same time, nothing is impossible.
I think the institutionalization of arbitrations in India will also open up more scope. Ruby, what about you? What are your thoughts? You've provided some insight from the academic world. I know insofar as perhaps the world outside is concerned, the academic and the practical world, they're very well connected. Whereas in India, I suppose that's not really true. What's the scope for practitioners in India and academicians in India?
So if in India you're an an academician, you can only teach and you can't really practice. You can't practice at all. So there are two roads and you have to choose one. Whereas if you're in European markets or in UK or in US, so in West at large, these both streams are aligned. So you can be an academician and you can practice at the same time. You can be associated with institutions at the same time. And as far as if I can talk about PhDs after LLM, so that's what I am looking at right now. So there are a lot of opportunities for PhD in arbitration. And after that, you can, practice if you like, because foreign law firms, they're open to PhD candidates as well as they are to fresh graduates. If you're an LLB or you're in PhD, law firms accepts both. And you can apply to the institutions or you can just join academia in general. So if we talk about foreign, both these streams are aligned, right? You can be an academician and a practitioner at the same time. But if you're in India, you have to choose one and you have to follow that field. So that's about it.
Okay, so Sriram, this is a question that came from you, from Anurag Rajgopalan. How did your background in common law, common law jurisdiction affect your studies and exposure with the professional world over there in France? And especially, I think this question we can even open up to Sai and Ruby. How did your experiences in India in a common law jurisdiction help in the UK, which is of course another common law jurisdiction, but how they were helpful? Perhaps we can start with you, Sai.
I think when it comes to London, the laws, when you go and see there, you'll see that a lot of Indian laws are actually modeled around the British legislations. So principally, the laws are same. Obviously, there are a lot of nitty-gritties that are different. But one thing, and you know, we when you're studying arbitration, you do need to study about civil law. One thing you did notice was that once you are clear with the principles, when you have when the principles are clear to you, it's not very difficult for you to understand civil law or common law. It's merely about you understanding the basic principles, and the law becomes very easy to understand. So it's not too big a challenge. However, it does involve a lot of reading, a lot of and a lot of hard work to gauge all the aspects of the dispute.
Okay.
I think
Sriram,
even for
please.
me, like coming from a common law background and then studying in UK, and our course was simply comparative international dispute resolution. So we studied about all the major jurisdictions in arbitration. And I remember we had this manual this thick, and it had all the arbitration laws from all the countries, from France, from Germany, from UK, US, India, Singapore. Name the country and you have it there. So I think we studied, we were brushed with the civil law jurisdictions as well. And since because international arbitration is sort of uniform and you know which principles to expect, so I think it was relatively easier. Even if you're from a common law jurisdiction, you can study in a civil law jurisdiction this particular subject, that is arbitration.
What about you, Sriram?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, obviously, France is a civil law country, and when you're going from a common law to civil law jurisdiction, one might think that yes, there might be differences. Yes, there are certain differences, like when you're interacting with practitioners and practical work. But arbitration is because since it's international arbitration, and the field in general is such that, for example, in my case, like in my batch, you have like civil law practitioners, you have common law practitioners. So and ultimately when you're discussing with various players in the market, that they either come from common law or civil law background. So I feel that there's a mix over there. And yes, there is a difference in terms of how you have to tailor your approach, because but then this, I feel that this is a question more tailored towards, in the sense that when you are actually working in the field and when you're approaching certain matters, because we always have this kind of debate in international arbitration about when an arbitrator or an arbitration tribunal is sitting, the president might be of a civil law background, and adjoining co-arbitrators would be of common law background, and whether is that an issue. So I don't think so it's an issue when you're pursuing an LLM of this sort, because an international arbitration LLM sort of shields you from that particular debate.
I think we might have lost Sriram over there.
Right. Sorry. Was there a connection loss?
Yes, but that's okay. We're connected now.
Right. Okay. So just to sum up, I mean, I feel that in terms of arbitrations, when you're pursuing an LLM in arbitration, I don't think so you need to worry about this common law, civil law issue. That is an issue for the next stage, when you're working on matters, because right. I don't think so it affects you at this stage.
Okay. So there's this question from Mr. Jitendra Gupta, and that is, can we discuss the prospects of online LLMs for working professionals who cannot attend classes physically? What is the extent of the recognition, the benefits of that? And I think what we could also discuss in this context is the networking value of an LLM. And would that be missed when you're going for an online LLM? So perhaps any three of you would want to take that up?
Yeah, networking value obviously is very important, and that's lost with this when you pursue an LLM online. But obviously, again, ultimately at the end of the day, you do get to learn a lot, and ultimately you are still interacting with professors. So you are sort of getting this virtual networking, which is there. So, and definitely you won't lose any value in terms of networking per se. Yes, there is a slight loss, but I feel that when a working professional pursues his LLM online, he's doing it to add something extra to its CV. So it can only be beneficial for you. I don't see it as affecting professional in concern. Obviously, financial constraints are a factor which will play ultimately in choosing this, but yeah.
If I may add to what Sriram just mentioned, Ruby just suggested in the chat while we were speaking before that there are a couple of short programs that take place in Netherlands, in Hague. And also there are a lot of sector specific or organization specific courses, like the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators gives certification to practitioners, and for that they have courses and exams, and based on the exams that you take, you get certain certifications that are quite that are recognized in arbitration. So all the working practitioners who find that it might be difficult for them to pursue an LLM might want to look at Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, because it does offer you the same material and it gives you a certain recognition in your field professionally and at a very smaller cost as well. So one is that, and secondly, if you want to augment your knowledge, probably there are a few lecture series online. One is by Gary Bond. It costs somewhere around 13,000 rupees, but it has access to all his lectures. This is just one of the courses. There are obviously online LLMs by Queen Mary and other universities, which are slightly more expensive. And yes, one thing you miss out in those courses is the networking opportunities. Therefore, for all the working professionals, I would recommend that you look at Chartered Institute of Arbitrators. You look at short 3-week, 4-week courses wherein you get best of both worlds, and also consider online LLMs because it's a degree after all.
Okay, so I think now what we try to do is, because we've overshot by the timeline by 100%, I assume. We're grateful to all the participants who stayed with us, and I think this is how we'll end. The last question that we'll take is one by Dalima, which is, could you please discuss about the content of SOPs? We go back again to the admission process, and very briefly, SOPs, right? What should be the focal point in your SOPs?
I think I'll start. I have 3 basic points, and maybe Sriram and Ruby can elaborate on that. So first is, why arbitration? Why do you want to pursue arbitration? Second is, why that particular university? What are your personal skills? And fourthly, how those skills will contribute positively to the university. So these are very 4 basic pointers, and I think Sriram and Ruby can either elaborate or add their own points to those.
So I think my statement of purpose also talked about, firstly, why arbitration for me. In that I talked about my brushing up with this particular field of law. I started up with my moot courts, then with my subject of dispute resolution, and then with the courses that I was doing at the time, online courses. And I talked about that arbitration was my field of interest as a law student, and then I pursued it in my practice, and that I wanted to expand that base. And then I wrote about why I'm choosing this university to come to learn arbitration. So I think Sai has excellently categorized the categories that you need to address. Why do you want to do arbitration? What have you done in your career as a law student and as a professional, if you are practicing as well in the field of arbitration, and why that particular university?
Sriram, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I do, in the sense, like, what to put in your SOP and all. So it's interesting. Yeah. So just to add to this, I can share an interesting anecdote, because I knew somebody who was for his LLM in Chicago. And so what happens is, when you apply for an LLM in Chicago, the HR not the HR, rather the person who selects because obviously you have recruiters over there who are, like, judging your application, and professors. So they sent a very interesting email, which I remember at the time him showing it to me. And it's very important, because he was explaining how recruiters at LLM universities, be it professors or be it, like, professional recruiters, recruit students for LLM, and how they analyze SOPs. And this is a very important information I'd like to share, because he was saying that, for example, when we looked at a couple of letter of references and we looked at a couple of SOPs, we could easily identify that many of them were either copied, or many of them were either what's it called? Either not ripped off, but a sort of like, it was a very standard format that, okay, I'm starting with this, I'm continuing with this, and I'm ending with this. So you could clearly see that you had adopted somebody else's format while following an SOP. So my advice is, when you're writing your SOP, write it yourself. Yes, it's good to look at other formats and of either your seniors or colleagues who have either gone for an LLM, looking at their statement of purposes, but don't model it on that. And SOP is your story ultimately at the end of the day. You're trying to sell yourself, and you're trying to convince the institution why they should take you on. So I think this is an important parameter you should keep in mind when you're approaching statement of purposes and all. Because I remember him mentioning in that mail, he was saying that what we do is, for example, a lot of people he was specifically talking about the Indian context, and he said that a lot of Indian SOPs, we were seeing that the recommendations were coming from a same set of judges, or judges who are working in particular fields, and or important people, and we could see that this did not match with their CV. For example, let's say I've given a recommendation of a particular judge, or in my SOP I've said that, okay, I worked in so and so fields, but my letter of recommendation is of a completely different individual. So that it's important to be extremely structured and extremely organized in terms of everything should match. This is all a puzzle at the end of the day. Your LOR should correspond to your SOP, and your SOP should completely talk about you, why you want to do an LLM. Always it's important to start off with a story, because you have to understand why you particularly selected arbitration and why this institution. So if you keep these factors in mind, I think it's a deal breaker for anybody who's reading your SOP, that he's written it originally and he's written it he has approached it correctly, and that's why we should take him on board.
I think that summarizes the entire issue with respect to SOPs very brilliantly. And I'm glad that we could end it on a note from what we had begun and what was the aim of this session, which was to share the anecdotes of individuals who've been there and who've lived through all of these experiences and given insight into to our viewers as to what can be expected. With that, what we'll do is we'll end this session. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for staying with us. We've tried to address as many questions as is possible. However, in case we might have missed out on a few, what you can possibly do is we've shared the details of these resource persons on the chat. You can go to their LinkedIn, can access that. What you can also do is, so you can get in touch with us and we'll get you in touch with them. Another thing that you can possibly do is, follow us, CADR, on our blog and of course our social media handles, which have been shared with you. This is our blog. I suppose it's up on everyone's screen. We've got a beautiful one at that. We are accepting submissions, so do submit your submissions. These are the submissions guidelines. You can take reference to them from our blog. The ID on which you have to submit is submissions.cadr@rgnul.ac.in. Again, it's there on the chat box functionality. To stay updated with the recent events in international arbitration, domestic arbitration, and other modes of ADR mechanisms, mediation, negotiation, you can follow our newsletter on our blog. Again, we release a monthly newsletter wherein we deal with wherein we summarize the major happenings of in the world of ADR, or in the world of international arbitration, in the world of investment arbitration. You can access these links which are provided to read more on any of these news pieces that we've covered. You can also access Ruby's blog over here. This is all about international arbitration.wordpress.com. And we thank you all for joining us. We hope this session proved to be productive for you. And we thank the resource persons with all our heart for expending 2.5 hours of their days for this event. Thank you, everyone. Sai, Sriram, and Ruby, thank you immensely.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us here. Absolutely.
So I think we'll end it at that. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
But stay safe.